Okay, thanks very much for coming together to talk about yesterday's election. I think it's safe to say that the result was unexpected by many commentators and pollsters. I'm just interested to see what you think, what your sort of initial reading is of what this means and why this result has taken place.
Let the victor take it first.
Well, I think it's the success of the Conservative Party's campaign. I think we've proven to voters our long-term economic plan is working, as he would disagree, and he's just got not even 250 votes. I just think it's testament to David Cameron's leadership over the past 5 years, and maybe people don't want another coalition and they're ready for a full-blown Conservative majority.
Yeah, no, certainly I think in the previous video I mentioned how the Tory vote is usually underestimated. I think certainly from the polls it's been a complete underestimation. In fact, it's been somewhat of a shock, especially for me waking up at 3 AM this morning and seeing Labour in the lead to something now 8 hours later having a Conservative majority. I think I've certainly put it down to Tory success in the campaign through a bit of SNP scaremongering, but albeit it was somewhat successful.
I mean, in my opinion, the failure really came splitting up the left. We used to have this stronghold of Scotland for Labour, but now with the rise of the SNP, we've just wiped that out.
Even with the SNP seats, you would have lost.
It was failures of the Labour.
You couldn't even reach 300 with the SNP.
Well, yeah, I know, but it was also the scaremongering of this SNP looming down.
I think that's a very clever tactic by the Conservative Party. Yes, it was. It's a very clever.
It's not scaremongering when they want to
the
get rid of
Labour
Trident, which
while
UKIP
also
would
attacking.
agree with keeping.
Actually, it's a very clever tactic. They wouldn't have had that condition, and you know that full well. What it did was it depressed the Labour vote in marginals, such as especially in London areas, but also in a more key way. What it did was it attacked the UKIP vote as well, the Conservative UKIP vote. It will gain votes back from the Conservatives. This is why in the Conservative-held target seats, UKIP generally underperformed at this general election, but overperformed in Labour-held areas. And also, I think you're getting the rise of sort of. I think Conservatives have run sort of a very negative campaign this election, overwhelmingly so, and I don't think that they'll be returned at a next general election. So
That's an interesting point. I mean, it leads to the next question really: is what do people see happening over the next 5 years? What do you think the big events are going to be?
On the supposed negative campaign, it's not been a negative campaign at all. What it has been, we've proven our record, what we've done over the past 5 years, and on the issue you said Trident, it's not scaremongering when the SNP clearly state what their aims are.
Let's look forward now to what happens next. I suppose from personal perspective, what's going to happen to the Liberals? What's going to happen to the Labour leadership? What are the big issues going to be over the next 5 years? Ross, do you want to start off?
Yeah, I'll go first. Well, obviously a very, very disappointing result for the Labour Party. Worse than anything I could expect. I mean, when the exit polls came in, I was just thinking, right, Miliband's out. Where are we going to go from now? Where are we going for here? Sorry. I really do think we need a massive shake up of the Labour Party. We need to reassess its aims. We need to reassess what it stands for, and we need to either move to a clear ideological position to maybe draw votes away from the SNP, get that Labour stronghold back, and more importantly, we lost this election in England. We didn't lose this election in Scotland, as you so kindly pointed out. Even with the SNP votes going back to Labour, the Tories will still have a majority. The Tories will still be in government. So what we need to do is appeal to a wider range of people in England, have a clear ideological vision, and I think we can move on from there. I think at the moment, the way things are going, if we don't change and we don't have a clear leadership, we could be going for another 20 years of Conservative.
Do you have a preference, Ross, as regards leadership of the Labour Party?
I think it will take a long time, but it's trying to be up to the trade unions.
I would say that Andy Burnham was the most likely next leader because Shockham Winston doesn't have the appeal among the Northern voters. And I think this election had a real crisis for Labour in the North and in Wales. I mean, there are some shock results of this general election. For example, in a Welsh seat, I think it was Merthyr Tydfil, UKIP came second polling 17%. And I think this shows a major shift between UKIP affecting the Conservatives and UKIP affecting Labour. And the reason we only won one seat, which is a real shame, is that the Conservative resurgence. The Conservative resurgence basically knocked off our top Conservative target seats. But we've been performing really well in Labour-held seats, which are not targets. For example, in Hartlepool, which is not a UKIP target seat, UKIP came within just 5% of taking out the Labour MP.
So can I ask, Will, what do you think the future is for UKIP? What's going to happen to UKIP over the next few years, I think?
Well, I think it obviously depends on the council elections come up today, what comes in from there. But I think what we'll see is UKIP as the official opposition in councils across the north, including Manchester and other councils. And I think they were a real long-term threat to Labour, as people are fed up of mass uncontrolled immigration in the north. And I think this is a real issue, especially I think UKIP's been helped by the rise of the SNP in the north, where the north wanted their own force for the north. And Labour's been seen as being complacent, been lazy. And frankly, the Labour campaign machine in the north is a disgrace. And if you kick the door down, I believe it will simply all come crumbling down in the north east for Labour.
Alex, can I ask you about Scotland? I mean, next year there are the Scottish elections, aren't there? And then, what do you think is going to happen with Scotland over the next few years? Is independence coming, do you think, sooner rather than later?
If you look in the SNP manifesto, independence wasn't on the table for this general election in particular. But I think what it really shows is how this wave of nationalism, which has revived Scotland in a sense, it's revived politics. We're not just another colony of England now. We are having our own voice. And I think if we are to have an EU referendum, which the Tories may or may not propose in 2017, I think that will ultimately decide whether we have an independence referendum again or not. And certainly I think for me personally, by 2017, I think we could see another referendum coming around, because as the results showed from the election, there's been this wave of nationalism, which, I mean, personally, I predicted the SNP to get high 40s, potentially even low 50 seats. But to have 56 and 59, which they did, was overwhelming.
Ethan, I mean, it's quite conceivable that under this Conservative government, we're going to lose Scotland and also pull out of the European Union, correct?
No, not necessarily. I think, firstly, on the European Union question, it's not this Conservative government, it's this Conservative government aiming to do what it said and reform the EU. Firstly, it's not we're pulling out of the EU as other parties.
But you'll have to give a referendum now. You're committed to that, aren't you?
No, of course. But why should we not give the people a referendum?
But what I'm saying is, it's quite possible there'll be a vote again for pulling out of Europe, correct?
Of course, but that's the choice of the people. It's no choice of a government to say we're pulling out of Europe. It's democracy at its purest.
Well, this was really. I mean, Cameron doesn't want to pull out of the EU. He did this to keep his backbenchers in sort of.
No, not necessarily, because the heart of democracy is not what Cameron wants; it's what Cameron thinks is good for the country. And if the country
what Cameron thinks will get him elected.
No, William, it's what he thinks is good for the country, and a referendum is required.
Well, with such a slender majority, they do need to concern themselves with the backbenchers, and there's a high majority of backbenchers who want to get out of Europe regardless of reform, and you have to admit that.
We have to admit reform's not possible. It depends what you mean by reform. There's a very limited reform you can achieve in the EU, built around sort of renegotiating perhaps some benefits, minor benefits rules. But the things that Conservatives are opposing are not achievable. And frankly, I think we'll see a humiliation flavoured Cameron, as he won't be able to argue for in, because he won't get what he wants in the renegotiation. But we won't call for out either, because he doesn't want to leave. And I think that'll be an incredibly awkward position now.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that, I feel for David Cameron, whilst it is all well and good having the majority which he has, I'm not sure he can particularly celebrate it due to the point we've mentioned here about the pressure from the backbench Conservatives. I think it will be one of the biggest issues, I think, for this next Tory government, is how can you address the issue of Europe. And especially in this election, it appears to me that you've managed to rally up a lot of UKIP supporters by pushing this somewhat anti-European movement. Correct me if I'm wrong in that sense.
On an EU referendum, MPs themselves would have a free vote choice. They would be able to campaign in or out of Europe. There wouldn't be no major divide. It's not as if the Parliament, the House of Parliament itself is voting on the issue of the European Union. It's the people are voting. So it's not down to the MPs to go and say, I want in. It's not splitting the party in two. It's simply saying, you have a choice as an individual, as all individuals in the country have, to say, I want to stay in the EU or I don't want to stay in the EU.
You can't ignore the pressure that must be coming from these Tory backbench to push for it.
No, I don't think the referendum itself.
I think
it's a principle in the party. We believe it should be given to the people.
I think interesting on backbenchers, particularly on backbenchers, especially for the Lib Dems, because what they're going to have is that the MP's been wiped out completely. They're gone basically. They have no parliamentary party. They could fit Lib Dem parliamentary party in a large people carrier. The problem they've got now is all their key spokesmen have lost their seats. Vince Hayward, the business secretary, lost his seat, for example. Across the country, it has been wiped off the map. So I don't know who they're going to put into for spokesman. They've even got a worse problem than UKIP. At least UKIP have the 22 MEPs who they can use as spokesman for key issues. The Lib Dems have precisely 9 parliamentarians in the whole of the UK now.
Interesting question. I mean, are the Lib Dems going to recover, or is this the end?
Well, I think it will be the end for the Lib Dems as they are in the current state. I think they can reform, but one of their members of Parliament, Nick Clegg, is now resigned, and I don't know what he's going to do for the next 5 years. I wouldn't be surprised if he actually stands down.
I think what he'll do is he'll stay because he has to. Because the result in his seat was so marginal that if he did resign, they would probably lose that seat to Labour. I mean, they'd be on 7, they'd be on less than a DUP. The only thing that saved the Lib Dems from total humiliation this election is the fact that the DUP lost a seat to the UUP. Otherwise, you have the Lib Dems on less seats than the Northern Ireland only Democratic Unionist Party, a party which only stands in 18 seats of the whole country, which is ridiculous. Frankly, I don't see how the Lib Dems can be a major party in the next election. I think at the next election there will be a paradigm shift in how we see the politics. Instead of 3 major parties, you'll have 2 major parties, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. And then beneath that there'll be sort of a sub-layer containing UKIP, the Lib Dems, the DUP, SNP, etc, etc. I think the 3-party system has basically completely collapsed. You've got a Scotland dominated by the SNP, but there's not really a third party in the UK. The third party in England is undoubtedly UKIP on votes. And I think we will see at the next general election UKIP sweeping Labour aside in places like Hartlepool and Hayward.
Okay.
And I think
probably time is going on, so I think maybe I'm going to just ask now if anyone wants to respond to that, that's fine. Or if each of you wants to make one final maybe observation that you feel is particularly sort of maybe interesting from this election. So Ross, you go first.
I think what Will just pointed out is really crucial. I mean, SNP got around 1.3 million votes, and they've returned 56 members of Parliament. UKIP, on the other hand, have 1 member of Parliament, and they've got about 3.75 million votes. So clearly, I know it's the system we've got, but clearly, even for a Labour supporter, something is wrong there. The issues which have been put towards the people have been met with this outcome, with a huge number of people voting for UKIP, and their needs haven't been met. There's nobody representing their views. I do think we need to move towards proportional representation. I think that will truly reflect this changing party atmosphere we've got. I mean, maybe the Labour Party even, and the Conservatives will be very reluctant to move towards that. And the SNP will be completely scared of that because it will give them the small...
about 25 seats, not 50
yes.
suddenly.
So
Ethan.
In fact, there's an outrage.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, Ethan, could you just sort of give your closing comments as well?
Shall I respond on the electoral system?
I think, or anything you want to talk
that's
about.
fine. I think first past the post, it delivers a strong, stable government which the country requires. It's when you have this multitude of, you would need serious constitutional reform if what you're proposing with PR. That wouldn't obviously be in your interest, as he's already said, Alex. No, I think to reform the electoral system right now would not be a sensible decision for the country. You have to agree.
I think with the Conservative Party, you get nice majorities of it.
It's not going to happen, though. It's not going to happen.
William, your final comments. Anything else you want to add?
Well, I think that you'll be surprised by how well you could do the next election. I think it's a disappointing result seat-wise, but vote-wise it's brilliant. And I think that the power of the SNP has been diminished by their failure to hold the balance of power. I think this Conservative government will probably go down as one of the weakest governments because it's not going to
do much stuff.
apart
from the Queen's speech.
And also, frankly, the Lib Dems are dead as the third party in British politics. I don't see them coming back. There seems to be a series of independents, not a proper party, and they're finished basically.
Okay, Alex, final thoughts?
Just quickly to sum up with regard to the Conservative government. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? They could be weak. They could be particularly effective. We don't really know it, especially with the issue of Europe. For me, with the first past the post system, it seems somewhat hypocritical. I mean, obviously some parties will benefit and some parties will lose from it, but that's the system we've had in place. And certainly from my perspective, if it had been a rainbow coalition or a hung parliament, I think there could be a legitimate argument for having electoral reform. The first past the post here has delivered what it has. It has delivered a stable government, a Conservative majority.
So you don't agree with the SNP policy of
the SNP got their fair share.
So you don't agree with the SNP policy of proportional representation then?
Well, no, this has worked out pretty well for the SNP. Who knows what will happen?
Okay, well, we'll have to finish it there. So thank you very much indeed for your insights, and go home and get some sleep. Thank you.